I could feel the weight of every eye in the room before he even opened his mouth, but nothing could have prepared me for the sting of his words. At my own family gathering, the one place I thought I belonged, he leaned back in his chair, smirk tugging at his lips, and laughed at me in front of everyone. "Oh, look at her trying so hard to impress. Does anyone actually take her seriously?" His voice carried easily through the room, each syllable landing like a sharp cut. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth, my cheeks burning hotter than I'd ever felt. People glanced at each other, shifting awkwardly, unsure whether to intervene or watch the unraveling. My husband's laughter was merciless. A slow, deliberate dismissal of every achievement, every effort I had quietly poured into my life. Years of late nights, silent sacrifices, and relentless work flashed through my mind, gone unnoticed, mocked publicly. I wanted to disappear, to vanish into thin air, yet somewhere inside, a quiet ember of fury began to glow, whispering that this humiliation would not be the end of me. That night, when the house finally fell silent, I sat in the dim light of the living room, staring at the untouched glass of wine on the table. The laughter from earlier still echoed in my head. His laughter. It wasn't the first time he had mocked me, but tonight, it felt final, like something inside me had cracked. My reflection in the window looked like a stranger. Tired eyes, forced smile, a woman who had learned to swallow hurt and call it patience. I thought about all the small betrayals that had built this quiet ache. The times he forgot to introduce me at business dinners. The moments he corrected my words mid-sentence, turning my confidence into a joke. The way he'd roll his eyes whenever I mentioned my dreams, saying, "Be realistic, sweetheart." And how I'd smile, pretending it didn't sting, because arguing felt like begging for dignity. There were flashbacks I couldn't shake. The night I stayed up sewing his torn cuff before an important meeting, only to hear him later tell colleagues his assistant handled it. The time I cooked for his clients, and he took the credit saying, "She's good for something, at least." Each memory pressed down like a hand on my throat, reminding me how small I'd allowed myself to become for the sake of keeping peace. But beneath the shame was something sharper. A quiet, pulsing determination I hadn't felt in years. I realized I'd spent too long waiting for validation from someone who thrived on keeping me beneath him. My silence had been his shield, my loyalty his weapon. As I sat there, the last trace of warmth I'd ever felt for him turned cold. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just made a promise, to myself, not to him. No one would ever make me feel that small again. Not in this house, not in this life. The woman he laughed at tonight wouldn't be the same woman he'd wake up to tomorrow. Something in me had shifted quietly, dangerously, and though he didn't know it yet, I had just begun to reclaim every piece of power he thought he'd taken from me. A few days later, I was walking past a cafe when I overheard a conversation at the next table. A group of women was talking about investments, businesses, and opportunities I had only ever dreamed of. Their voices were filled with excitement, with confidence, with a sense of ownership over their lives that made my chest ache with both envy and longing. I stopped in my tracks, clutching my coat, feeling an unfamiliar mix of fear and exhilaration. One of them said, "If you plan strategically, you can turn even the smallest investment into real independence." That sentence lodged itself in my mind, like a seed refusing to be ignored. I replayed it over and over on the walk home, pacing the empty sidewalks, imagining what it would feel like to take control of my life. To finally rise above the ridicule I had endured for so long, I muttered under my breath, "I can do this. I have to." Each word reinforced itself, a mantra building strength in my chest. That night, I sat at my laptop, diving into articles about financial strategies, real estate, and career advancement. I sketched lists, mapped connections, and made notes about opportunities I could seize quietly, methodically, without him even realizing. I whispered to myself as I typed, "If he thinks I'm weak, I'll prove him catastrophically wrong." The fire inside me was growing, igniting visions of a life he couldn't mock, couldn't touch. For the first time in years, my thoughts weren't consumed by his laughter. They were filled with plans, potential, and strategy. I imagined conversations with myself. "You're smarter than he thinks. You're capable. You deserve every bit of success he denied you. That inner dialogue became a constant companion, each statement a brick in the foundation of the life I was about to build. By the end of the night, the shame that had weighed me down for years had transformed into purpose. I wasn't just hurt, I was awakening. And with that awakening came a promise. I would reclaim my life, my dignity, and eventually, the power to make him regret ever laughing at me. I started small, almost invisibly, as if testing the waters before plunging in. Mornings were spent poring over documents I had never cared to understand before. Company reports, balance sheets, market analyses. I asked questions at dinner parties, feigning casual curiosity, while secretly absorbing details that my husband assumed I would ignore. He didn't notice my sudden attentiveness, of course. He still thought of me as delicate, incapable of handling anything beyond the household and polite conversation. And I let him. I began attending networking events, joining professional groups online, and quietly connecting with people who held knowledge or influence in areas he had always dismissed me from. Each handshake, each brief conversation was a small victory. Every nod of recognition I received outside his sphere fueled a sense of power I hadn't felt in years. I realized that the world didn't see me the way he did, and that revelation thrilled me. One evening, while reviewing some company contracts, I stumbled across an overlooked detail, a minor misstep that, if leveraged correctly, could give me leverage in the future. My pulse quickened as I imagined how he would react if he knew I had noticed. If he knew that his assumptions about me were about to be his undoing. I smiled faintly at the thought, savoring the irony. The best part? He had no idea. Every smirk, every condescending comment he'd made only reinforced the miscalculation he'd made about my abilities. Little did he know, his underestimation was exactly what made these moves possible. And as I closed my laptop that night, a quiet thrill coursed through me. The game had begun, and for once, the odds were in my favor, even if he was still laughing, blissfully unaware. It happened sooner than I expected. I received an unexpected invitation to speak at a local business seminar, a modest event on the surface, but with the right audience. I hesitated for only a moment before accepting, rehearsing my presentation late into the night, pouring energy into making every word count. The morning of the event, I dressed sharply, deliberately choosing an outfit that commanded attention without screaming for it. I wanted to be noticed, but not in a way he could dismiss. When I stepped onto the stage, the room was filled with professionals whose eyes followed me, curious and attentive. I spoke with clarity, authority, and a quiet confidence I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Each nod from the audience, each appreciative murmur, built my courage, and I felt a rush unlike anything I had experienced before. For the first time, I wasn't the woman he ridiculed. I was someone people respected, someone who could influence and impress without a trace of his interference. Later, at dinner, I casually mentioned the seminar. His laugh came automatically, sharp and condescending. That small event, really? People clapping for you doesn't make you important, he said, smirking. But the truth was clear. The whispers and emails I'd already received from attendees told a different story. His dismissive attitude, meant to undermine me, only highlighted how little he understood the subtle power I was accumulating. That smirk, meant to belittle, now served as a reminder of how quickly I was outgrowing his perception of me. I caught a fleeting glance from a friend at the table, a look of quiet surprise and admiration, and it fueled something deeper. The tension between us thickened, unspoken yet palpable. He still believed he held control, still thought the game was his to manipulate, but the first crack in his armor had appeared, and I knew, in that moment, that every small victory would build until the foundation of our relationship, as he knew it, could no longer hold. I realized early on that I couldn't do this alone. So, quietly, I began reaching out to people who had influence and insight, employees at the company who were overlooked by my husband, friends who had always respected me, even distant relatives who recognized my capability but never spoke up. Every conversation was deliberate, casual on the surface, but carefully planting seeds of trust and shared vision beneath. I listened more than I spoke, learning who held power, who was ambitious, and who would quietly support a plan for change if given reason. One evening, over coffee with an old colleague, I suggested ideas about company improvements in passing. They asked for details, curiosity shining in their eyes. I answered thoughtfully, revealing just enough to inspire confidence without exposing my hand. That balance became my signature approach. Subtle, intelligent, impossible to trace back to anything overt. At home, I meticulously planned my next moves. I made notes, drew diagrams, and rehearsed conversations as if preparing for a chess match. Every meeting, every discussion with potential allies was another piece in a carefully orchestrated strategy. My mind raced with possibilities. Which relationships to cultivate, which weaknesses to exploit, and how to time each step so it seemed natural, inevitable even, to everyone else. The thrill of clever maneuvering energized me. For the first time in years, I felt in control of my destiny rather than reacting to his whims. And quietly, without him realizing, my circle of support grew. Each ally I gained added another layer to my plan, reinforcing the sense that I was no longer underestimated. His laughter and dismissive comments might still echo in my ears, but now they fueled me. Every underestimation became an asset, every doubt a tool I could wield. The game had shifted, and for the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was building an empire from the shadows. I was going through some old financial documents when I stumbled upon it, a subtle but deliberate scheme my husband had been running for years, designed to keep me dependent, belittled, and powerless. At first, I couldn't believe my eyes. He had manipulated investments, shifted assets, and hidden opportunities, all while pretending to be supportive and loving. Every memory of his concern and advice suddenly took on a sinister tint, each smile masking calculated control. Anger surged through me, hot and relentless. How many years had I been working, sacrificing, striving, only to be trapped by his quiet manipulations? I paced the room, feeling the familiar ache of shame twist into something sharper, rage tempered with clarity. For the first time, I truly saw the extent of his deceit, and with that realization came power. I began to map out my options. Each weakness I uncovered in his scheme became a stepping stone, each miscalculation a potential lever. I whispered to myself over and over, "This ends now. He will not control me anymore." The betrayal that had once made me feel small now fueled a meticulous plan. I would turn his deception against him, using every hidden trap he had laid to build my own path to victory. And with that, a sense of empowerment settled over me, a cold, determined certainty that my next moves would be unstoppable. Over the next few weeks, the world seemed to conspire in both challenge and opportunity. Public events, business meetings, and casual social gatherings became stages where I could quietly demonstrate the competence my husband had always denied me. At a networking luncheon, I answered questions about market trends with insight that drew nods from seasoned professionals, their approval obvious even to him. He smirked, leaning back in his chair, as if my knowledge were insignificant. But every approving glance toward me from others tightened the invisible noose of his discomfort. During company meetings, I began offering suggestions that were small yet strategic, improvements and ideas that others readily implemented. My husband would dismiss them with a wave or a laugh, thinking it harmless, yet each instance revealed his blind spot. He underestimated me entirely. The subtlety of my moves became my weapon. Each nod, each smile, each whispered compliment from colleagues was a reminder that I was more than he had ever allowed himself to see. Even in casual social settings, he continued his mockery, lightly joking at my expense in front of family and friends. But I had learned to mask my reaction, letting the irritation simmer beneath a composed exterior. Meanwhile, the quiet victories accumulated, layering momentum and tension. The audience of my life, the colleagues, the friends, even the family, began to notice a shift, catching glimpses of the woman he had mocked. The anticipation hung in the air, palpable. Everyone, including him, was waiting for the inevitable moment when the underestimated would rise, and when that day came, it would be explosive. It was the meeting I had been waiting for, the one that would finally tip the scales. I walked into the boardroom with a calm confidence, my portfolio in hand, my plan rehearsed to perfection. While he lounged in his usual smug posture, expecting yet another display of obedience, I calmly outlined a proposal, a strategic investment that would secure a controlling stake in the company. Every word was measured, every number precise. The room went quiet, the kind of silence that made my pulse race with anticipation. My husband's smirk faltered almost immediately. He leaned forward, a faint flush creeping across his face as he processed the implications. "Wait, are you suggesting—" he started, voice catching. I didn't answer him directly. I let the others react first, letting the nods, murmurs, and quick approvals roll over him like a tidal wave. Every glance, every whispered agreement made it clear. The tables had turned. By the end of the meeting, the decision was unanimous. I had successfully maneuvered my way into a position of undeniable authority, leaving him stunned and scrambling. Outside the room, colleagues who had quietly supported me gave subtle smiles and nods, and I caught glimpses of their respect mingled with disbelief. My husband's dismissive attitude, meant to belittle me, had become the very tool that allowed me to rise. The shock on his face was priceless, but the satisfaction ran deeper. I had anticipated every move, prepared for every objection, and now, publicly and decisively, the balance of power had shifted. The night of the gala arrived, a sprawling event filled with industry leaders, media, and family members alike. I walked in wearing confidence like armor, every step measured, every glance purposeful. The room buzzed with chatter, but my focus was singular. Tonight, everything I had built, every careful move, every quiet victory, would culminate in a single, undeniable statement of power. My husband was there, as expected, perfectly groomed, smiling at acquaintances, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. The announcement came at the peak of the evening, with the CEO calling me to the stage under the pretense of honoring contributions to the company. Instead, I revealed the final piece of my strategy. I now held the majority stake, and as a result, ownership of the company, alongside the assets that had once been used to keep me subservient, the penthouse, the luxury accounts, everything he had assumed he controlled. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Whispers spread like wildfire. I felt eyes on me, some impressed, some shocked, some envious, and one pair burning with disbelief. His. He opened his mouth to speak, to interrupt, to dismiss, but the room's attention held him in place. His smirk faltered, then vanished entirely as he realized the magnitude of what had occurred. Every insult he had hurled, every public humiliation, every dismissive gesture, all of it had backfired spectacularly. I stood tall, a quiet smile playing on my lips, savoring the moment. For the first time in years, I wasn't the laughed-at wife. I was the woman commanding attention, respect, and undeniable power. Even family members who had once questioned my abilities now looked at me with awe. Colleagues and industry peers whispered congratulations, some discreetly, some audibly. My husband's embarrassment was complete. He had underestimated me, thought he could control me, and now he was powerless before the world he valued so highly. I had turned every slight into a step upward, every doubt into leverage, every ridicule into fuel. By the time the night ended, I had not only reclaimed what he had tried to deny me, I had surpassed him entirely. I felt a sense of liberation I had never known, the thrill of independence, the rush of vindication, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that my triumph was undeniable, in every sense of the word. Tonight, the world saw me as I had always been capable of being, and he had no choice but to witness it. The laughter he had once used as a weapon now hung around him like a hollow echo, a reminder that power, patience, and cunning can overturn even the deepest-seated arrogance. Later, alone in my new penthouse, I sank into the plush couch, letting the events of the evening settle around me. The city lights stretched endlessly beyond the windows, a reminder of how far I had come, from humiliation and doubt to power and independence. I allowed myself a deep breath, feeling a wave of relief wash over me, mingled with pride. Every small victory, every careful plan, every late night of strategy had led to this moment. The woman who had been laughed at, dismissed, and underestimated had finally claimed her place. I thought about the years of quiet endurance, the sacrifices that had gone unnoticed, and the resilience that had carried me through each subtle betrayal. I realized that my worth had never depended on his recognition. It had always existed, quietly, waiting for me to claim it. Each memory of ridicule now felt like a lesson, a building block that had forged the strength I needed to rise. A smile crept across my face as I acknowledged the transformation within me. I was no longer defined by his laughter or the limits he imposed. I was capable, intelligent, and unstoppable in ways he had never imagined. The empowerment I felt was more profound than any material gain. It was the realization that I had agency over my life, that I could orchestrate my destiny with precision and confidence. In that quiet reflection, I allowed myself to feel true catharsis. The anger that had once simmered beneath my surface had been tempered into clarity and purpose. I was whole, independent, and finally free. The woman who had endured so much was no longer the same. She had grown into someone formidable, unshakable, and deserving of every success she had painstakingly earned. And in that solitude, I understood the deepest satisfaction of all. I had reclaimed not just my life, but my dignity and self-worth, in a way no one could ever take away. Mornings in the penthouse felt surreal. Sunlight spilled across marble countertops and floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a golden glow over the space I had earned through strategy, patience, and sheer determination. I brewed my coffee while overlooking the skyline, a quiet smile tugging at my lips as I reflected on how far I had come. Each room, each piece of art, each carefully chosen detail of my home reminded me of victories too numerous to count, small triumphs that had led to this life of abundance. I attended charity galas and industry events, not just as a guest, but as someone whose opinion mattered. People approached me for advice, recognition, or partnerships, and I navigated each interaction with grace and quiet confidence. Friends and colleagues, who had once doubted me, now sought my perspective, and even my husband's old allies could no longer dismiss my presence. The world had shifted, and I was at the center, but I carried myself with a humility born of the struggles I had endured. Travel became part of my routine. Weekends spent in scenic escapes. Business trips doubling as opportunities to explore new cities. Luxury was no longer a fantasy. It was a tangible daily experience. Yet I never forgot the lessons I had learned about patience, foresight, and the power of subtlety. I reveled in my independence, knowing that every indulgence, every accolade, had been earned through intelligence and resilience. Evenings were quieter, moments of reflection in my penthouse, reminding me that life's truest victories aren't measured only by wealth or status, but by the growth, dignity, and self-respect that come from overcoming betrayal. I had not only achieved success, I had mastered the art of transforming humiliation into power. And that knowledge, more than any luxury, was what made my life profoundly satisfying. Sitting quietly in my penthouse, I let the journey replay in my mind, the laughter that once cut me down, the countless moments of doubt, and the long nights of careful planning. I realized that the most important lessons weren't about wealth, status, or revenge. They were about recognizing my own worth, trusting my instincts, and exercising patience when others underestimated me. Every slight, every mockery had become a stepping stone, a challenge that forced me to sharpen my mind and claim my space in the world. I thought about the subtlety of strategy, how small, calculated moves could shift the course of life without anyone realizing until it was too late. It wasn't about showing off or humiliating anyone. It was about reclaiming what was mine and proving to myself that I could rise above humiliation with intelligence and composure. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that resilience and cunning, when combined with patience, could change everything. I hoped anyone listening to my story would see themselves in it. The underestimated, the overlooked, the dismissed, and recognize that strength can grow quietly until it becomes unstoppable. Empowerment isn't instantaneous. It's a deliberate, relentless process. And in that reflection, I felt calm. I had transformed not only my circumstances, but also how I saw myself. The woman who endured ridicule had become someone capable, respected, and independent. That transformation, more than any penthouse or company, was the true reward. A reminder that self-worth and perseverance are the foundations of every triumph. Even as I settled into my new life, a sense of restlessness lingered beneath the surface. Success had brought freedom, wealth, and recognition, but it had also revealed new challenges I hadn't anticipated. Opportunities came knocking from unexpected directions, business ventures that required calculated risk, social dynamics that demanded careful navigation, and whispers of rivals who had watched my rise with envy. I realized that power wasn't a destination. It was a journey that required constant vigilance, creativity, and strategy. One evening, as I reviewed a proposal for a new partnership, a familiar thrill sparked in my chest, the same drive that had fueled my rise. The numbers and projections were promising, but the stakes were high, and the potential for opposition, public or private, loomed. I smiled to myself, thinking, if they think this is the end of my story, they have no idea what's coming next. The thought of orchestrating another reversal, of turning underestimation into advantage once more, sent a rush of anticipation through me. I poured myself a glass of wine and gazed out over the city lights, knowing that every triumph I had claimed had prepared me for the next battle. There would be new obstacles, perhaps even greater challenges, but I welcomed them, not with fear, but with confidence. The woman who had once been humiliated was now unstoppable, and the future with all its possibilities was mine to shape. And as the night deepened, I realized that this was only the beginning.